Welcome to the HR Dialogues, a podcast where we talk about HR and the future of work. We've got a very exciting episode lined up today, and for the very first time on the HR Dialogues, I'm joined by a panel who will be sharing some of the latest research that was done in collaboration between AIHR and Revelio Labs. Welcome to the HR Dialogues, where we learn from people practitioners as they navigate the emerging world of work. Starting on my right-hand side, Lisa, please tell us who you are, what do you do at Revelio Labs, and welcome to the HR Dialogues.
Thanks so much for having me, Dieter. This is very exciting. So my name's Lisa Simon. I'm the chief economist at Revelio Labs. We're a workforce intelligence company. We can essentially understand the workforce at any company. And I get to lead the economics team. So that's the team that's lucky enough to be able to dive into the data, do good research, and understand, everything that we want to know about the workforce. So I always say I have the best job in the world as a labor economist doing this.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Lisa, and welcome to our episode, and look forward to deep dive into some of the insights that we've gathered. Marna, if I can throw the ball to you, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Marna. I am an HR subject matter expert at AIHR. So I get involved in a lot of the content creation. I provide input into our thought leadership, and then, of course, getting involved in applied research projects with background is not in economics, but more from an HR perspective and then organizational psychology.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Marna, for joining us. And you are actually a returning guest on the HR Dialogues as well. So great to have you with us again. Hakki, last but definitely not least, if you can do an introduction on your end.
Of course, my name is Hakki. I'm a senior economist at Revelio Labs. And as Lisa said, we have really exciting data on labor economics. So it's very exciting to work with that and gain additional insights, and especially share it with in collaborations with groups such as you are.
Happy to lead us into the topic, a little bit of context and background to the collaboration. And we at AIHR talk a lot about the future of HR and how HR is going to be instrumental in terms of guiding organizations into what we refer to as the next chapter of work. A question which we often ask is, how prepared is HR really for the transitions and the shifts that need to happen in order to be able to get us there? And as part of this particular collaboration, I think some really, really interesting insights that we found. And firstly, and we'll dive into that in a moment, but looking at more than 3 million data points around the HR landscape, helping us understand what is the current state of the HR function, the HR skill set, and then also HR careers in terms of how people are developing within the profession. We've also identified 5 major challenges, and I want to refer to them as challenges and not obstacles because I think that they are definitely solvable within the HR domain, that as professionals we do need to be aware of if we are going to grasp the opportunities that do exist on the horizon. And lastly, some really nice tangible insights around actions that HR professionals can take not only in their own careers, but also in the broader context of repositioning themselves within organizations in order to address some of these potential challenges. Marna, I'm going to start with you to ask the question, what inspired this research and what were you trying to achieve through this particular project?
As you mentioned, one of the conversations we frequently have at AHR is how do we prepare the HR profession for the future? And I think that's kind of what inspired the research. The question, very small question we started with is, how prepared is HR for the future? So we started with taking a step back. If we look at the HR function, if we look at the HR profession as a whole, so professionals and the skill sets that they have, where are we? Where are their gaps? And we then thought about HR careers because that's really instrumental in how skills develop. What is the state of HR careers? What are HR professionals telling us about how their careers develop? Where are there still gaps and obstacles that we need to think about?
I'm definitely going to come back to you towards the end of our conversation and ask you for a view and an opinion on how prepared is HR, but not to put you on the spot just for the moment. Hakki, can you just give us some context to when we talk about workforce data, when we talk about Revelio Labs specifically, what are we talking about?
Of course, as Lisa said, we are a workforce intelligence company. And we collect and standardize publicly available employment records. We try to get our hands on anything that is publicly available in this domain, but the main culprits are, of course, online resumes, job postings, sentiment data, and layoff data. And as we standardize and bring all this information together, this enables us to look under the hood of any company, look at market level trends, at individual level, talent intelligence, and also answer, important questions such as, is HR ready for the future, by looking at the HR talents and their skills that they have, the job openings that they have, and how that's changing over time.
That's fantastic. What I really must say from my perspective, what I enjoyed was also the ability to utilize the data to carve through some of the assumptions or perceptions that people do hold about, the function. And when you mention to somebody that you work in HR, you try not to lead with that from an introduction point of view, because then either somebody's going to ask you about hire, fire, difficult manager, or something that I need to write on a CV. Whereas I think the data perspective is actually very different. And I think it does carve quite a nice reality about what HR professionals do, and what it looks like at the moment. And maybe keeping on the theme of data, Lisa, what surprised you most about this particular project?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I was thinking about it this morning, and we're labor economists. So the topic of HR and personal economics is something that's actually very, very close to our hearts. And yet, I would be lying if I said that I sort of expected these results. That's a theme that will be emerging, that HR has a little bit of an image problem. I think we can say that. Maybe we can dive into that discussion in a little bit. But what really surprised me is sort of how people get into the profession in HR. It's a lot later than on average in other functions, such as say admin or finance or marketing, any of the other big corporate functions. People seem to really stumble into HR. So those entries aren't necessarily maybe as planned as you'd think. And when we were writing about this content, we have a little newsletter, and we always try to sort of be a little bit provocative with our titles to get people to be interested. We went with the title "Do Little Kids Dream of HR Careers" or something like that. I think we didn't do the "Do Little Girls Dream of HR Careers," but we were inclusive. I think gender is also a topic that we can talk about in terms of some of the challenges that HR is facing. But it sort of encapsulates this topic that HR has a bit of a talent pipeline challenge, to go with your word, that can be overcome. But I think that needs to be taken into account of how people get into these roles, what are sort of their backgrounds, and what are the skills, coming into these careers. So I think that's sort of my the big surprise to me of how unplanned these career entries tend to be.
I think there's the conscious decision that some people make pertaining to a career. And then I think and I love the words that you used around stumbling into a particular career. Now, as great as it is from people exploring and coming from various different backgrounds, the challenge there does lie in terms of what does the baseline skill set look like, and how do we structure especially early careers? Because to your point, HR people tend to get into HR slightly later. They come with various different backgrounds. I think the research also showcased, more administrative in nature or teaching, educational in nature as well, which I think also then provides us with quite an accurate view around why certain HR professionals are interested in certain types of activities and not necessarily in others. And there's not right or wrong, but it is a reality, especially when we start talking a lot more about HR from an analytics point of view, from a data perspective, and how that's going to play out as well. Now, one of the key interesting things, and Hakki, I'm going to come to you on this one, was in the report you spoke about the fact that there's underinvestment within HR. Now, immediately for a lot of people, when they hear the word underinvestment, it's like, yes, finally somebody's talking about the fact that HR doesn't have enough budget. Problem's a little bit more complex than that, right?
For sure. As you said, I think there's two kinds of investment that we can talk about. Of course, the one is investment into HR tools and capabilities, and the second one, investment in the human capital within the HR. From the first point of view, yeah, as you said, I don't need to add anything. Everyone knows how hard it is to get a budget for a new tool that could be really useful. But also what we have found is that, the small companies, of course, they're getting started. They don't have a lot of people. Of course, they have none to almost, a couple of people at most doing this HR functions. And that's usually the traditional part of HR about, just compliance and, making sure the paychecks are on time. But as organizations grow, the problems grow like more than proportional. Now you have to worry about workforce planning, retraining. So this is like requires organizational skills at a much larger level. Um, but what we see is that once companies hit a certain threshold, the HR is just like growing, just with the company, but not at the levels that you would expect, given the challenges that they face, especially today, when we're talking about all these new exciting technologies. But that is going to require a lot of adaptation in the workforce, and HR is going to be the lead in this. So their responsibilities are now more than ever. We need more people, more hands on the deck, but that's not what we're seeing at the moment.
Mm. And what's interesting for me there is really around the fact that we expect, to your point, a lot more from HR today. So if you look at the broader spectrum pertaining to things like well-being, and, being involved in sustainability, yet I sometimes get the sense that organizations don't professionalize their HR department the same way that they would invest in functions like, marketing, operations, sales, etc. It does bring about the old terminology about core business and non-core business, which I'm really, really not a fan of. I think everybody's got a role and to play in that. And to your point, I think we have to really start rethinking. And Marna, I'd love your view on this before we deep dive into the skills topic around how we actually set up HR teams. I get these requests kind of annually just before budget time. I get a million emails that ask, so what is the latest ratios for HR business partners or HR to, the broader organizational context? And I think what the report kind of highlighted to us, and we can infer that probably a little bit, is that that might not be the best way to think about how to grow your HR organization, because businesses go through different phases with different types of requirements. Mana, maybe your thoughts on that, having been an ex-BP, which I'm sure you've had to do a couple of ratios in your life before.
Yeah, I think ratios try and simplify something that's a bit more complex. And yes, it's helpful, but I also think with complexity and how the ask of HR is very different, the ratios don't always do justice. So I think they serve a purpose at a point in time, but I think it's looking at what HR needs to deliver, what are those skills, and sometimes you need more of a particular skill depending on where the organization is at. So I definitely think what was interesting for me out of the investment conversation is how it compares to other functions. So if we look at marketing and administration, HR is always the smallest little slither of the pie chart, which is the 2%, which is interesting to me. I think we always have to kind of fight for our existence in HR, and I do think the data kind of supports that HR is kind of last on the list to receive investment in the business.
It does pose quite a question around how do you actually build an HR function and department, and what are the different stages and phases that you have to go through when you do start thinking about what we invest in and what we don't invest in. Because Haka, back to your point, not everybody wants to invest in tool sets, but in my experience, very often our investment in HR technology is sometimes so late down the road that we've actually not really leveraging much benefit out of it. We're kind of just solving for some inefficiencies that we would have started picking up over time. Lisa, I want to come to you because that talks a lot about HR skills, right? And what types of HR skills we require. And I think something that was interesting, and maybe you can shed a little bit of light on that, was this mismatch between what people say they want from HR and what is advertised versus what HR professionals actually evaluate and say, these are the skill sets that we possess.
Yeah, absolutely. The way we were able to do that in the first place, maybe that's quite an interesting tidbit, is that we, of course, see job postings for HR professionals, and we can sort of parse those out and look at what the lists that list of skills that these job postings have. And then on the other hand, and that's sort of very often I find the missing piece in similar analyses, is that you see what people are actually able to do. So you see their skills on their resumes, but also how they describe their job and their function. When you put these two together, right, at whichever level, you can see whether they actually, match up. Do as many people mention, recruiting or data analytics in job postings as they do say that tell them in skills. And especially at a really high level, it's sort of you can paint a really nice picture how well the profession in terms of its aspirations and sort of its actual talent match together. And it was very interesting here in the HR case that there is quite a mismatch between sort of the aspirations and the reality. I don't think that's to say that either one is wrong, like, oh, all the employees don't have the right skills. or the employers are delusional for asking for all these skills. But there's just sort of a misalignment, right? In the sense that there seems to be a lot more focus on the on the sort of existing skills of HR professionals and really classical HR skills. So really recruiting, human resources, the things that you mentioned, Hakki, earlier, that sort of come, classically when you think about the HR function, talent sourcing, management, a lot of managerial skills actually, which is, I think, is a really encouraging sign. On what the employers sort of wish for, though, are sort of a lot more, I would say, sort of communication skills, data analytics skills, just sort of more outward looking, but also data driven. And I think that's just something to be aware of, that there is sort of a mismatch. And I think it comes down a lot to sort of talent pipelines. So really being aware of where do you source your talent from, who are the people that you're getting in, and sort of knowing what you get, right? I think a lot of sort of it all goes hand in hand. The fact that entries into HR careers tend to be so varied that you don't necessarily know what you're going to get as sort of a package in HR, right? What can you expect from people? So I think you need to sort of get, evaluate where you are and pick people up where they are, and then maybe, provide them with the right skills to succeed from there. And I think that's sort of the second piece, right? The skilling and providing the right tools to people. We were recently doing something on the DEI function in particular, and I think there's a lot of talk at the moment, especially in the US, around, has DEI as sort of a function within HR failed? And we've seen sort of such high attrition rates. But I think a lot of this comes down to sort of, there was this huge expectation posed on this role, and they were not given the tools to succeed.
That's great, Lisa. And I think a couple of things that you've mentioned that I think is really important to take into consideration for those listening today. And the one is that the mismatch conversation is also an important one that we need to eradicate over time, so that we have more consistency about also, I think, how people describe their skills. So within HR professionals are notoriously bad at understanding what their transferable skill sets are, and actually, what is it that you are really good at, which is why I think that there's a lot more description from an individual point of view around some of the more traditional HR skills, because those are the ones that we talk about. I can tell you I can recruit, yes or no, or I can tell you I can do, certain talent activities. I think from an employer point of view, what we did see and that you mentioned is that there is really a need for something different, but in some way, these two things are not quite really getting to each other in terms of what that path towards that looks like. And as HR, we are often the custodians of reskilling for the organization and planning for the workforce of the future, but we do need to look a little bit more internally. There's a lovely article that came out a while ago that spoke about what happened to all the CPOs, what happened to all the HR leaders, because a lot of people are not staying within the profession. They are leaving out, and we're actually not really describing what we want from that particular role. My own experience, then that role becomes absolutely everything for everyone, and you don't really ground that skill set, to be able to guide that going forward. So I think, what stands out for me from what you've mentioned, it's really valuable to have the conversation around what do we actually expect from an HR professional in this particular role in this organization. I think we do need to get a little bit more specific there. I want to bridge there, Lisa, from your point around the unstructured nature and then how people get into HR, Marna, to you there, because that has to have certain implications for the way that we think about HR careers. My experience, Lisa mentioned it, people stumble into HR. Very few people grow up saying, I want to be an HR professional one day. And respectfully, some of those that do that for all the wrong reasons, because they might not have, a consistent view around what HR really does.
So as Lisa mentioned, the unplanned entry into HR is a very significant finding for us. And that, of course, indicates how ready people are when they enter into the profession, and are they able to then meet the expectations that are held of HR professionals. The other one for me that was interesting is, once people are within the HR profession, how does that pattern unfold? And we found that for a lot of HR professionals, when they reflect back on their career, it still is a traditional career path, which for us just means a hierarchical upward movement and progression into roles. However, that is very much tied to the organization and the structure and the opportunities that exist within an organization, which again tells us about how skills develop. And then for a large part, it was also very unstructured. So people look back and there's no clear plan, or things happen haphazardly for skills development. That then means the same thing, that we develop skills by accident or just based on the opportunities that are available. What was interesting, and there's an article that came out that spoke about this, and I really liked what they call it. They call it the HR island, and that HR professionals tend to not move off the HR island in their careers, which I think is very profound, because we also found that there's very little cross-skilling or cross-functional movement within HR, which means that skills that don't traditionally sit within the HR function aren't necessarily incubated. So if we think of data and digital, we don't think that's something that develops in HR. So where does it then develop? So I think on the movement and the entry into and the unstructured nature of HR careers, those were some of the findings that I found interesting, that really has an impact on how skills are then developed within the profession as well.
I think once you're in the HR cult and you're part of the family, you are in it for life. I definitely agree with the fact that it does pose a couple of questions around where do these new skill sets then come from. Lisa, you mentioned earlier that there's also a reputation challenge that HR has and an image problem. These two things then kind of start playing together, that you're not necessarily going to really incorporate somebody from another function that wants to move into HR due to some held beliefs or perceptions. Now, whether they are true or not, it's their truth, it's their reality. But then on the other side, it's also not developing within HR. And I think that's a real challenge for us to think about as we start building broader talent HR pools for the future that can tap into a diversity of skill set that we need to meet the current mandate and the new expectations of HR functions in the future. I want to ask a general question to all three of you. Looking back at the report, at AIHR, we love to give advice around how do we move forward. So what are some of those main things that we can do to actually give some advice to the HR teams and HR leaders and HR professionals listening to this kind of podcast today? What would be a piece of advice or a key takeaway that you had out of this research that is actionable, that we can start thinking about to guide the next step for us in the HR domain going forward?
I'd like to, just continue the conversation about this skills. So as I said, it's very interesting because HR is the function that is, tasked with rescaling the components, but also it doesn't really enjoy, as some other professions do, a strong pipeline. If you're looking for economists, why don't you find someone graduated from economics? Or if you're looking for an engineer, why don't you look for someone who has engineering degrees? Therefore, HR really needs to get people from this other domains, and as much as it is their task to also reskill, you are pulling these people to the domain, and there are certain skills and new skills that you want them to have.
There's also something there, Hakki, that we never think about HR at a graduate level. And I've never heard of an HR-specific graduate program, for example, that takes people and says, with a certain background, I can upskill you over a period of time to start breeding a type of HR professional that has got certain skill sets. So I think there is some thought that we do need to start giving as a profession just around grassroots development. To your point, when people do start shifting and moving into the HR profession from other directions, how do we bridge that gap? Because those people will not come in with the nuance that sometimes you need to understand that makes HR a contextual science. And I think that's something important to bear in mind. I'll be the first to admit, as a very passionate HR professional, we are really bad at following our own advice around reskilling, around change, and around trying something new. So maybe that's something we need to reflect on a little bit more. Lisa, can I throw the same question to you? Key takeaway and advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd like to pick up that image point within HR. So why don't little kids, dream of careers in HR? Like you said, you're both in the cult. I think you should talk about your cult more. Go to career fairs. I think there's sort of multiple entryways, as we discussed, into HR, and led impressionable young young professionals about to enter into their careers know about these opportunities. I think there's sort of so many different majors and fields, right, that sort of lead perfectly up to HR careers, whether that's psychology, sociology, economics, right, data science. All of these skills are so welcome and applicable in HR functions. And I at least have the impression that people don't know that and don't appreciate that. So I think go out there and talk about it more, I think.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, we sometimes make the joke to say that HR has got a public relations challenge, right? And a public relations problem. We never talk about ourselves. We always try to be a little bit more in the background. Now, the downside of that is that actually nobody knows about the great work that gets done within HR professions. And I blame public media on it a little bit. Then when they do talk about HR, it's the 98% of HR professionals are burnt out, survey results, which also does not provide an accurate reflection of the nature and I think a realistic preview of the role that HR professionals can have. Marna, I would love to hear your piece of advice. I'd love you also to build a little bit just on what Lisa has mentioned there, because I think it does point an interesting fact around why people stay within HR.
When speaking to people and you ask them why did they join, everyone mentions, well, 80% of people talk about making an impact. So even if they've stumbled in, the thing that keeps them going, where it's quite tough, a lot of people also remark that HR is a tough gig, is to make an impact. And it's not just make an impact on people in the organization, it's impact on communities, it's also a business impact. So believe it or not, HR people want to see businesses be successful. And then if I look at what is the ask from HR, and we have to be more strategic, we have to partner more with business, we have to have digital skills, we have to have data skills, there seems to be a little bit of a contradiction between why people enter into the profession versus what is the ask from them. So I think we also at a point where we have to think about how do we make HR careers still appealing for HR professionals and get in the right type of HR professional without being unrealistic about what it looks like to be in HR. I think the data showed it, and then from the interviews as well, people tend to exit at a particular point. So at some point, people just have enough and it's not worth it for them, and they lose kind of the sense of meaning and purpose. They go and do something else. And sometimes they come back. We also see the exit and entry back into HR. But in some cases, HR professionals simply move on, and then speaks to the pipeline issue that we also have. So I think there's something around making HR careers more appealing, but also thinking about how we support and enable HR careers. It's not just the PR and making it look good, but how do we really support HR careers in a sustainable way?
We often have the debate around value and how do you showcase value and strategic impact. I think we should also take that one step further and how do we show meaning? Very often for HR professionals, that's the reason why they stay, but it's often unarticulated. And a lot of HR professionals I speak to, they're like, I don't really know whether I make a difference or not because it's not about the ROI I'm showing on the latest learning initiative. It's sometimes very much caught up in the almost the stories that you hear employees give you feedback on. And that's why I really think that there has to be something slightly different there as well. My last question to the three of you, and I'm going to put you all in the uncomfortable seat of answering the research question that we started with in terms of how ready do you believe that HR is for the future?
I'll start. I'd say it's getting there. Um, I think it's impressive to me with everything that's being thrown at the profession in terms of what it's supposed to sort of juggle and handle, of how well it's doing that. It's an incredibly multifaceted role that doesn't get a lot of support from corporate and stays very small. So given its size, I'd say it's small but mighty. And there's obviously always way up, but I think there's a readiness and sort of a savviness to handling all sorts of things that I actually commend.
Perfect. Okay, your view?
No, I mean, definitely. I think Lisa is right that HR, I'll say, has been fast in response to the changes in the landscape of jobs. I think they took on the future of work. They took on the reskilling. Um, so I think we are off to a great start, but of course there needs to be a lot done.
Perfect. Marna, over to you.
I think it depends on what we see the future of HR being, but I think it's also we have to be an active participant in shaping that future. And I think there's great strides in HR, and I think people are aware. I think HR is not unaware of the pain points, which is good. But I also think it depends, and I think there has to be acknowledgement of the interconnectedness, and that's why we focus on the function, the profession, and HR careers, because it's being smart about which levers to pull, and not necessarily saying let's get into problem solving mode and let's just reskill and upskill HR, because I don't think that's the answer to being prepared. Is not more upskilling, but it's really thinking about how do we enable the function, how we set up, how do we create a profession that's appealing for young professionals as well.
Perfect. So, Lisa, Hakki, Marna, thank you very much for your insights. And I think definitely a great conversation for us to continue in the community and broader as well around what the future of HR holds. A couple of things maybe that stood out for me really as part of our conversation. The first one, as we've mentioned, the future does look bright, but there is actions that we need to take from an HR point of view. The function at the moment is punching a little bit above its weight with very limited investment, trying to still do a lot. Careers in HR seems to be a bit unstructured, which poses certain challenges around baseline skill sets, poses certain challenges also pertaining to why people stay or why people leave the HR profession. And we face some grassroots challenges just really in terms of making HR an attractive career prospect that's realistic for people to get access to a more broader, diverse skill set and pool of talent that's going to enable and equip us for the future as well. From my side, a very, very big thank you to everybody listening. You will have access to the report as well as part of this particular episode. Please feel free to engage with anybody on the call today for further information or further clarification pertaining to what the future of HR will hold. And on that note, we will see you soon. And thank you very much to my panel today for your great insight and the wonderful work that you do. All the best, and we'll chat soon.